I was sitting in a nursing home chair that smelled like disinfectant and broken promises when the lawyer in the expensive suit walked through those sliding doors and changed my life forever. But what he told me wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part was what happened when my son and his greedy wife found out I'd inherited $12 million and a ranch from the brother they thought was just a family embarrassment. They showed up exactly 1 week later with papers they wanted me to sign and words that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. "Transfer it all to us," my daughter-in-law said, standing in my new living room like she owned it, "and we can let you live in our house again, you ungrateful old witch." But what they didn't know was that my lawyer was already on his way. And what happened next would teach them that some people are dangerous to underestimate. Welcome back to Her Real Stories, and if you're new here, welcome to a community where we share the most incredible true stories of strength, justice, and second chances. Today's story is going to show you what happens when people mistake kindness for weakness one too many times. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell because you're about to hear how a discarded mother became the architect of the most satisfying revenge I've ever encountered. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and let me know in the comments what you think about today's story. My name is Dahlia Fenwick, and I'm 68 years old. For most of my life, I believed that being a good mother meant accepting whatever treatment my son decided I deserved. I believed that love without conditions was the highest form of love. I believed that sacrifice was the same thing as devotion. I was wrong about all of that. And it took being abandoned in a nursing home to finally understand the difference between love and exploitation. But let me start from the beginning, because you need to understand how a woman can spend 43 years raising a child, only to have that child throw her away the moment she becomes inconvenient. I married young and became a mother even younger. My husband left when Owen was 8, deciding that responsibility was too heavy a burden for his restless soul. I raised Owen alone, working double shifts as a nurse to keep us in our small house on Maple Street. I wanted him to have everything I never had: stability, opportunities, a mother who never made him feel like a burden. Maybe that was my first mistake. Maybe I made life too easy for him. Owen grew up handsome and charming, the kind of boy who could talk his way out of trouble and into other people's good graces. Teachers loved him. Neighbors doted on him. Girls followed him around like he was made of sunshine and promises. I was proud of how effortlessly he moved through the world. I didn't realize that people who never face consequences never learn to value what they have. When Owen graduated high school, I used my life savings to send him to college. When he wanted to study business instead of something practical, I supported his dreams. When he met Maribel during his senior year, I welcomed her like the daughter I'd never had. Maribel was beautiful in that expensive way that makes people assume she must be worth whatever she costs. Blonde hair that caught light like spun gold, clothes that never wrinkled, and the kind of confidence that comes from never doubting you deserve the best of everything. She came from money, or at least she acted like she did. Her parents lived in a big house in the good part of town and made it clear they thought their daughter was settling by marrying a boy whose mother worked for a living. But Maribel seemed to love Owen, and Owen was happier than I'd ever seen him. When they got engaged, I spent every penny of my savings on a wedding that left me eating peanut butter sandwiches for months. When they wanted to buy a house they couldn't afford, I took out a second mortgage on my own home to help with their down payment. I told myself this was what mothers did. This was love in action. Over the years, Owen and Maribel's problems became my emergencies to solve. Car repairs, credit card debt, home improvements, vacation funds. Every crisis required my immediate financial intervention. "It's just temporary, Mom," Owen would say whenever they needed money. "We'll pay you back as soon as the business picks up." The business never picked up. The debts kept growing. My savings kept shrinking. But I kept giving anyway because I was afraid that if I stopped being useful, I'd stop being loved. The warning signs were there, but I ignored them. Phone calls that started with "I need" instead of "How are you?" Visits that felt more like business meetings than family time. Holidays where I felt like a guest in their celebration rather than a cherished family member. When I turned 65 and retired from nursing, I thought things might change. I thought having more time might bring us closer together. Instead, they started pressuring me to sell my house. "It's too big for one person," Maribel would say, eyeing my modest three-bedroom home like it was a mansion. "You could get good money for it and move somewhere more appropriate." Appropriate. Code for smaller, cheaper, and farther away from them. "Mom, you can't just sit around all day," Maribel would say whenever I mentioned feeling lonely. "You need to find hobbies. Make friends your own age." Friends my own age. Like I was a child who needed to be managed and contained with appropriate playmates. The first real crisis came when I fell and broke my hip 2 years ago. I called Owen from a hospital, scared and in pain, needing someone to advocate for me with the doctors and nurses who suddenly saw me as just another elderly patient taking up space. "Can you come?" I asked. "I'm frightened, and they're talking about surgery." "Mom, it's really not a good time. Maribel has that charity gala tomorrow, and I promised I'd help her get ready." "You'll be fine. The doctors know what they're doing." A charity gala. More important than her mother-in-law facing surgery alone. Owen visited once during my week-long hospital stay. He brought flowers from the grocery store and stayed 20 minutes, checking his phone the entire time. "You look good, Mom." "Much better. The nurses are taking great care of you." He left before I could tell him how scared I was about going home to an empty house with a walker and a list of restrictions longer than my arm. The recovery was harder than the surgery. Simple tasks became mountainous challenges. Getting dressed, making meals, taking showers without falling again. I called Owen several times asking for help with grocery shopping or household chores. "Mom, we're just so busy right now. Can't you hire someone? Maybe it's time to think about getting some regular help around the house." Regular help I couldn't afford because I'd spent my retirement funds helping them live beyond their means for the past 15 years. That's when Maribel started leaving brochures around my house. Assisted living facilities with names like Golden Years Manor and Sunset Gardens. Places with photographs of smiling elderly people playing checkers and doing crafts like children at summer camp. "Just something to think about," she'd say, arranging the glossy pamphlets on my kitchen counter. "For when you're ready to simplify your life." Simplify my life. Code for when I became too much trouble to manage at a distance. The breaking point came 6 months ago when I had a small kitchen fire. Nothing serious, just a dish towel that got too close to a burner while I was making dinner. The smoke alarm woke the neighbors, who called the fire department. By the time Owen and Maribel arrived, the kitchen was aired out, and the only damage was a scorch mark on the counter and my bruised pride. "This is exactly what we were worried about," Maribel said, surveying the scene like she was documenting evidence of my incompetence. "What if you'd been sleeping? What if the neighbors hadn't heard the alarm?" But I wasn't sleeping. I handled it myself. Nobody got hurt. "This time," Owen said, and his voice carried a finality that made my chest tighten. "Mom, we need to talk about making some changes." The changes they wanted to discuss involved selling my house and moving me into what they called a safer environment. They'd already visited several facilities and found one they thought would be perfect for my needs. Shady Oaks Nursing Home. A place where people went to wait quietly for death while their families visited on major holidays and pretended everything was fine. "It's just temporary," Owen kept saying as we drove there with my hastily packed suitcase in the trunk. "Just while we figure out the best long-term solution." But I could see in his eyes that this was the long-term solution. This was him washing his hands of the responsibility I'd become. Maribel sat in the front seat wearing a silk blouse she couldn't afford, her perfume sweet and cloying in the car's closed air. She didn't turn around once during the drive. The lobby smelled like industrial disinfectant and overcooked vegetables. A television in the corner muttered about medications that would make you cheerful about dying. Elderly residents sat in chairs arranged around the TV, like they were watching their own futures play out in slow motion. "You'll make friends," Maribel said as we walked to my room, the same tone you'd use with a child being dropped off at daycare. "There are activities. Bingo on Thursdays." Bingo. As if losing my independence could be solved with numbered balls and plastic markers. They stayed long enough to help me unpack my few belongings into the metal dresser and plastic nightstand that constituted my new furniture. Then Owen kissed my forehead like I was already a memory, and they walked through those sliding doors without looking back. I sat in the chair by my window and watched their car pull away, taking with it any illusion that I mattered to the people I'd spent my life serving. The first night, a woman down the hall called out for her daughter until her voice gave out. I lay in the thin-sheeted bed listening to her pain and counting the cracks in the ceiling like a roadmap to nowhere. On the third day, a nurse whose name tag said June gave me a flu shot and told me to drink water and not to cry. "I'm not crying," I said. She nodded like she'd heard that lie before. I tried to hold on to routines that would keep me tethered to the person I used to be. I made my bed every morning with military precision. I wrote in a cheap spiral notebook every day, one line about what I'd eaten, one memory from the past, and one true thing about the present. The true thing was always the hardest to write. "I am alone" felt too dramatic. "I am safe" felt like a lie. "I am invisible" felt exactly right. Owen visited once in the first month. He brought a grocery store plant and stayed 15 minutes, fidgeting with his car keys the entire time. "How are you settling in, Mom?" "Making friends." "It's fine," I said, because what was the point of telling him it wasn't?
"I'm managing."
Good, good. That's what we wanted to hear. Maribel sends her love. She's been so busy with her charity work. Charity work. Helping everyone except the woman who'd made her comfortable life possible. He left promising to visit more often, but I knew he wouldn't. I was a problem he'd solved by placing me somewhere he didn't have to think about me anymore. The days blended together in a haze of institutional meals and mandatory activities designed to keep us occupied rather than engaged. I played bingo because they expected it. I attended craft time because it filled the hours between breakfast and dinner. I made conversation with other residents because the silence was sometimes louder than the loneliness. But I never stopped watching, never stopped listening, never stopped being Dahlia Fenwick, even when everyone around me seemed to forget that I was still a complete person with a complete mind and a body that had simply grown old. That's why I was alert and oriented when Emery Pike walked through those sliding doors on a Tuesday that started like any other day and changed everything that came after. He was tall and distinguished, wearing a navy suit that had been tailored to fit him perfectly. His shoes were polished leather, and his hair had the kind of precise part that suggested attention to detail in all things. "Miss Fenwick," he asked the receptionist, using my maiden name instead of the married name that most people knew me by. "Room 237, she said without looking up from her computer. He knocked on my door frame, even though the door was open. Manners that had been bred into him rather than learned. "Ms. Dahlia Fenwick?"
"I'm Emery Pike."
"I represent your brother Gerald's estate." I hadn't heard Gerald's name spoken aloud in years. We'd grown up as allies in a house full of chaos, but adulthood had taken us in different directions. He'd made money in land and cattle and art, disappearing into the kind of life that money builds around you like a wall. Private clubs and weekend houses and friends who knew him by his net worth rather than his character. I'd lost track of him somewhere in the maze of my own responsibilities. Christmas cards that came less frequently until they stopped coming at all. Phone calls that dwindled from monthly to yearly to nothing. "Gerald's dead," Emery said, settling into the visitor's chair like he was delivering routine business rather than news that would reshape my world. "Heart attack 3 weeks ago." Very sudden. I felt something twist in my chest. Grief for the brother I'd lost twice now, first to distance and success, then to death and time. He left instructions. Emery continued, pulling papers from his briefcase. Very specific instructions about how his estate should be handled. The words that came next lived in my mouth like hard candy. I couldn't decide whether to swallow or spit out.
Ranch.
$12 million. Art collection. Horses. A life I'd never imagined existing, let alone belonging to me. Emery handed me a letter written in Gerald's familiar handwriting, the same careful script he'd used to write to me from summer camp when we were 10 and 12. Doll. It began, using the nickname only he had ever called me. I know we left things unsaid, but blood is blood, and time is shorter than we think. I've been watching from a distance, and I know what's been done to you. Consider this my apology for not stepping in sooner, and my vote of confidence in who you've always been underneath all that selfless mothering. Take what I built and make it yours. It always should have been anyway. The ranch has good bones, and the land has good water. The horses know their names, and the men who work the place know their jobs. All it needs is someone who understands what a home is supposed to feel like. Don't let them make you small, doll. You were never meant to be small. I signed the papers Emery placed in front of me with hands that shook just enough to make my signature look different from the woman who'd checked into this place 3 months ago. The next morning, I hugged Nurse June hard enough to bruise her ribs and walked out of Shady Oaks nursing home with my suitcase rolling behind me like a well-trained dog finally allowed to follow its owner home. The ranch sat under a sky so vast you could spill your entire life into it and not stay in a corner. Red brick buildings with white trim, fencing that stretched to the horizon, and a porch that creaked a welcome when I stepped onto it for the first time. The air smelled like hay and earth and possibilities I'd forgotten existed. Inside, the floors were old wood that had been cared for by people who understood craftsmanship. The walls held paintings of landscapes and livestock and a portrait of a woman with her hair pinned up, not smiling but sure of herself in a way I envied. I slept that first night with all the windows open, listening to horses moving softly in the pastures and feeling space around me like a luxury I'd never known I was missing. The foreman, Clint Alder, was a man with weathered hands and the kind of quiet competence that comes from years of managing land and animals and weather. He showed me around the property with the patience of someone who understood that ownership and knowledge were different things. Your brother was good to work for, he told me as we walked the fence line on my second morning. Fair with his money, clear about his expectations. Never asked us to do anything he wouldn't do himself. I don't know much about ranching, I admitted. You'll learn. Land teaches you what it needs if you pay attention. It took exactly 8 days for Owen and Maribel to find me. They didn't call first. They simply appeared at the end of the long driveway in a leased BMW, driving up to the house like they'd been invited rather than like they were trespassing on property they had no claim to. Owen got out of the car first, and for a moment I saw the little boy he'd been before life taught him that charm could substitute for character. He was still handsome in that easy way that made people want to give him things, but there was something desperate in his eyes now that hadn't been there before. Maribel emerged from the passenger seat wearing designer clothes and an expression that tried to look concerned but couldn't quite hide the calculation underneath. "Mother," Owen said, opening his arms like he expected me to run into them. "We were so worried when the nursing home said you'd left. We didn't know where you were." His hug felt like performance art, all movement and no substance. His heart was beating fast against my shoulder, the rhythm of someone who is nervous about something more than my well-being. "We tracked you down through the estate lawyer," Maribel said, kissing the air beside my cheek. "This place is incredible. Much too much for someone your age to handle alone." Her eyes were already doing an inventory of everything visible from the front porch. Persian rugs, original artwork, furniture that had been chosen for quality rather than price. I could practically see her calculating values in her head. Let us help, she continued, her manicured nails tapping against the porch railing. Transfer the accounts to Owen, put the deed in his name, and we'll bring you home. You can live with us. We'll take care of everything, you ungrateful old witch. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire nobody had noticed starting. Ungrateful old witch. Said so casually, like it was a pet name she'd been using for years when I wasn't around to hear it. Instead of stinging, the insult clarified everything. It was like someone had cleaned a dirty window, and suddenly the view was perfectly clear, not beautiful but honest. Would you like some coffee? I asked, as if she hadn't just revealed exactly what she thought of me. I only drink oat milk, Maribel said, wrinkling her nose at the idea of regular coffee. We have cows, I said mildly. And we have black coffee. You can choose between them. That evening, after they'd gone back to town to find a hotel, I called Emery Pike. I need some legal protections put in place, I told him. And I need them to be bulletproof. What kind of protections? The kind that prevent loving family members from helping themselves to things that don't belong to them. Emery understood immediately. He'd been practicing estate law long enough to recognize the signs of relatives who saw inheritance as a correction to their own financial problems rather than a gift to be respected. We spent the next morning setting up an irrevocable trust with language so tight that not even the hungriest attorney would want to chew on it. The trust would protect the ranch and the majority of Gerald's cash inheritance. We added a no-contest clause that would strip anyone who challenged the will of any potential future inheritance. However, I deliberately left Gerald's personal bank accounts outside the trust temporarily. They still showed my name as sole beneficiary, making them appear vulnerable to someone with the right paperwork. They'll probably claim you're not competent to make these decisions, Emery warned. It's the standard play when families want to override someone's wishes. Then let's remove that possibility. We arranged for a comprehensive competency evaluation with Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a geriatric psychiatrist whose reputation was solid enough to withstand any legal challenge. Tell me the names of the last 6 presidents, she said. I rattled them off backwards without pausing. Count backwards from 100 by 7s. 100, 93, 86, 79. I continued until she smiled and told me to stop. Dr. Mitchell wrote, fully competent, in her careful script and signed her name with a flourish that suggested she was confident in her assessment. But paperwork, I knew, wouldn't be enough. Owen and Maribel weren't creative thinkers, but they were persistent, and persistence had a way of wearing people down through sheer repetition. So I decided to stop being someone they could wear down. I became a wall that smiled. Maribel tried first, arriving alone the next afternoon with red-rimmed eyes and her hand resting protectively over her stomach. I didn't want to tell you yet, she whispered, settling onto the porch swing like a bird testing a perch. We've been trying for so long, and it finally happened. She laid her head on my shoulder with the practiced ease of someone who'd learned that physical vulnerability could be a weapon as sharp as any blade. Owen is terrified, she continued. He wants to provide security for our family, for your grandchild. If you love us, if you love the baby, you'll help us. Just start the paperwork. A small transfer for the baby's future. She pressed a sonogram photo into my hand. It was grainy and black and white, the kind of image that could be anything or nothing depending on what you wanted to see. I studied it carefully, turning it to catch the light. In the corner, I could just make out part of a medical label that had been mostly torn away. What remained showed a date from 6 months ago, and the partial letters, Ellie Med. This is beautiful, I said, not mentioning what I'd noticed. I'd love to be more involved in the pregnancy. When is your next appointment? I'd like to come along and hear the heartbeat myself. Maribel's face went through several expressions in quick succession before settling on something that might have been panic. Oh, well, we're still early. The doctor wants to wait before scheduling too many visits. Of course. But surely there's a follow-up appointment? I could drive you. Make sure you're taking proper care of yourself. I'll let you know, she said, standing abruptly. I should get home. Owen worries when I'm gone too long. She left quickly, and the next day she called to tell me she was so sorry, but we lost it. Her voice trembled with what sounded like genuine grief, but I'd learned that people can grieve the loss of lies just as deeply as they mourn the loss of truth. I told her I was sorry for her loss and offered to help in any way I could. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote in my notebook, Maribel, pregnant, sonogram for Shelley, miscarriage after I asked to attend appointment. Then I drew a small arrow connecting pregnant to liar and underlined it twice. Owen tried a different approach. He arrived the following morning looking boyish and vulnerable, hands shoved deep in his pockets. Mom, he said, settling onto the porch steps like he used to when he was young and had something difficult to confess. I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear me. He'd always been handsome in a way that made people want to protect him from consequences. I watched him arrange his features into an expression of wounded honesty. You always loved Uncle Gerald more than me, he said, and there was enough truth in it to make the lie that followed more believable. He got the attention, the approval, the pride. I got the lectures about responsibility and living up to my potential. It was manipulation, but skilled manipulation. He was taking a real hurt from childhood and weaponizing it against present circumstances. We're drowning, Mom, he continued, his voice cracking just enough to sound authentic. The mortgage, the car payments, Maribel's. He stopped before saying spending, but we both knew what he meant. I'm trying to be the man you raised me to be, but I don't know how to do it without help. I want to help you, I said, and I meant it. I did want to help him, just not in the way he expected. What do you need from me? Relief flooded his face like sunrise. Just make it easier. Sign some papers. Let me handle the business side so you can enjoy your retirement without worrying about financial management. Bring me whatever papers you think would help, I told him. Anything that would make this transition smoother for both of us. He was back the next day with a folder full of documents that looked official if you didn't know how to read legal language carefully, which he assumed I didn't. Powers of attorney, property transfer forms, and bank signature cards that would have given him complete control over Gerald's inheritance. In the spaces where my signature belonged, I had Emery insert a tiny notation, witness signature required by E. Pike only. We loaded the office printer with security paper that would show tampering if anyone tried to alter the documents. I signed the decoy papers with a wrong middle initial and a flourish I'd never used in my life, creating a signature that looked official but wouldn't hold up to any serious scrutiny. We'll get these notarized, Owen said, trying to hide his eagerness as he gathered up the papers. I know someone who makes house calls. That sounds convenient, I said, knowing that his notary would be as fake as everything else about this transaction. Over the next week, I began hearing whispers around town. At the feed store, at the diner where the coffee was terrible but the pie made up for it, at the post office where gossip traveled faster than mail. Poor thing, a woman said while examining produce at the grocery store. Not all there anymore. That's why the sun is taking over her affairs. I turned toward her with the bright smile I'd perfected over decades of nursing difficult patients. Excuse me, aren't you Margaret Holloway? How's your grandson doing? The one who got arrested for selling drugs behind the high school. Her face went crimson as a tomato. She abandoned her shopping cart and hurried toward the exit. The whispers followed me everywhere, but I'd learned something important about small-town gossip. It could be redirected as easily as a garden hose. At the next Rotary Club dinner, I stood up during the open microphone portion and addressed the room directly. I've heard some concerns about my mental capacity, I said, letting my voice carry to every corner of the room. I want to assure everyone that I recently underwent comprehensive testing by Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a certified geriatric psychiatrist. I'm happy to report that I passed with flying colors. I pulled out my competency evaluation and waved it like a flag. I can still remember all my ex-boyfriend's birthdays, even though I've conveniently forgotten my ex-husband's. Some things are worth remembering, and some things aren't worth the brain space. The laughter was warm and genuine, and I watched the rumor about my incompetence shrivel like a flower in drought. But I wasn't done setting my traps. I invited Owen and Maribel to spend a weekend at the ranch to get to know the place better. I gave them keys to the guest quarters and the main house, carefully excluding access to my office and personal spaces. I made a show of putting a small brass key on a hook inside the kitchen pantry, telling them it was just a spare for emergencies. The key opened nothing more important than an old storage shed, but they didn't need to know that. That night, I lay in bed listening to them move through the house, after they thought I was asleep. Footsteps in the hallway, whispered conversations, the soft sound of doors being tested and found locked. In the morning, the brass key was gone from its hook, but I said nothing. I gave them small tests designed to reveal their true intentions. I asked Owen to help me understand the ranch's payroll system, showing him a ledger with a column labeled Emergency Cash Reserve, $25,000. We left the office to go horseback riding, and when we returned, I glanced at the ledger. The number had been changed to $15,000 in different handwriting. I asked Maribel to help me inventory the silver and china, mentioning that some pieces were quite valuable. I tucked an antique ring worth about $15,000 into the bottom of the silver chest, with a note that said, E, in Gerald's handwriting. The ring was gone by dinner, but the next morning I wore it to breakfast. When Maribel saw it on my hand, she dropped her spoon into her grapefruit and complained that citrus always made her hands itch. I began staging what looked like a gradual surrender to their manipulation. I cooked Owen's favorite pot roast recipe and set the table with the good china I'd promised him years ago. I lit candles and opened a bottle of expensive wine Gerald had left in the cellar. "I've been thinking," I said as we ate. "Maybe you're right about this place being too much for me to handle alone. Maybe it's time to consider simplifying things." The hope that bloomed on their faces was almost painful to watch. They leaned forward like flowers turning toward sunlight, hungry for the words they'd been waiting to hear.
What kind of simplifying?
Owen asked, trying to sound casual. "Well, maybe we could work out some kind of arrangement. Something that would make everyone more comfortable." They spent the rest of the evening trading meaningful glances and speaking in code about practical solutions and family responsibility. After dinner, they stepped onto the porch to take a phone call together, their whispers carrying on the night air like promises they thought no one else could hear. Through the kitchen window, I watched Maribel gesture excitedly while Owen nodded, so enthusiastically I thought his head might detach from his neck. They fell into the trap the way people fall asleep. Slowly, then all at once. The forged documents appeared at the county clerk's office the following Tuesday. Transfer deeds with my fabricated signature, power of attorney forms notarized by someone who spelled my middle name wrong, and bank authorization forms attempting to access Gerald's personal accounts. The ones I'd deliberately left outside the trust protection. The clerk, a woman named Patricia, whose mother I'd sent flowers to after her surgery, called me before lunch. "Dahlia, honey, I've got some paperwork here with your name on it, but something doesn't look right. The signatures don't match what we have on file, and these are trying to access accounts that show recent activity warnings." "I'll be right there," I said, and called Emery Pike. We didn't have Owen and Maribel arrested immediately. Instead, we documented everything, photographed every forged signature, recorded every fake notarization. It was more educational to let them think they'd succeeded. I spent that week planning a dinner party. Not a casual family meal, but a formal event with the kind of guest list that would make excellent witnesses. I invited everyone who had ever watched Owen charm his way through life without consequences. Cousins who'd always been a little jealous of his easy success, neighbors who'd lent him money that never got repaid, family friends who'd watched him take advantage of my generosity for years. I also invited the people who mattered in our small community. The bank president who'd known Gerald, the judge who'd handled his estate, the mayor whose wife had been my friend since high school. I wore a black dress that fit me perfectly and jewelry that caught the light like stars. The table was set with Gerald's best china and crystal, and I'd hired caterers to prepare a meal worthy of the occasion. "Thank you all for coming," I said when everyone had gathered in the dining room. "Before we begin, I want you to know that I've already provided all relevant evidence to the appropriate authorities. Tonight, I wanted you all to witness the truth with your own eyes." I stood at the head of the table with Emery beside me, holding a folder full of documents that would change several lives before the evening was over. "First, I want you to know how much your friendship and support have meant to me during this transition. Moving from the nursing home to the ranch has been overwhelming, and your kindness has made all the difference." Murmurs of appreciation rippled around the table. Forks paused halfway to mouths as people sensed that something significant was about to happen. "I also want to share my plans for Gerald's inheritance," I continued. "I've given this a lot of thought, and I've decided how the estate will be distributed when I'm gone." I nodded to Emery, who began distributing sealed envelopes to specific guests around the table. "Mrs. Patterson, you've managed Gerald's books for 30 years with perfect honesty and dedication. You'll receive the art collection and enough money to retire comfortably." I turned to Clint Alder, the ranch foreman. "Clint, you and the men who work this land have made it what it is. You'll receive ownership of the working ranch and all the equipment." I continued around the table, acknowledging the people who'd contributed to Gerald's success or shown me genuine kindness during my lowest moments. Finally, I turned to Owen and Maribel, who were holding hands so tightly their knuckles had gone white. "Owen and Maribel, you are not included in this inheritance." The silence that fell was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Maribel laughed first, a sound like glass cracking under pressure. "You can't do that," she said, her voice shrill with disbelief. "We're family. We'll contest it." "You're welcome to try," I replied calmly. "But there's a no contest clause in Gerald's will. If you challenge it, you'll forfeit any possibility of future inheritance. You'll get nothing instead of the nothing you're already getting." I slid 2 photographs across the table toward them. The first showed Owen's forged signature next to my real one for comparison. The second showed the fake notary stamp with my middle name spelled incorrectly. Gasps echoed around the table as people realized what they were looking at. "There's also this," I added, pulling out my phone and pressing play. Owen's voice filled the dining room, recorded during one of their late-night prowling sessions. "Just sign it. She'll never notice the difference." Maribel's response was equally clear. "I'm not going back to that apartment. Do whatever it takes." The collective intake of breath around the table sounded like wind through leaves. My cousin Beatrice pressed her napkin to her mouth, caught between shock and what might have been inappropriate laughter. Owen stood up, so abruptly his chair fell backward and hit the floor like a gunshot. "You set us up," he said, his face flushed red with rage and humiliation. "You planned this whole thing." "I gave you every opportunity to be decent," I replied. "You chose something else. This is insane. You're punishing us for trying to help you manage your affairs. I'm allowing you to experience the natural consequences of fraud and forgery." Maribel was staring at the photographs like they might disappear if she concentrated hard enough. "Those signatures," she started, "are forgeries," I finished, "which makes them evidence in a criminal investigation." The word criminal hit the room like a physical force. Several guests pushed back from the table as if fraud might be contagious. "We were protecting you," Owen said desperately. You're not capable of managing this kind of money. We were acting in your best interests. My best interests, I repeated. Is that what you called it when you dumped me in a nursing home? When you sold my house without asking? When you stopped visiting because I'd become inconvenient? That's not how it happened, isn't it? Tell me, Owen, when was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing? When was the last time you spent time with me without wanting something? He opened his mouth and closed it again, unable to answer. You saw me as a resource to be managed, not as a person to be loved. And when I stopped being useful, you discarded me like trash. Owen's boyish charm finally cracked completely, revealing the entitled man underneath. You'll regret this, he said, his voice cold with fury. We won't let you get away with humiliating us like this. The only thing I regret, I said calmly, is that it took me 68 years to stop letting you. They left before dessert, storming out into the night like the storm clouds they'd always been. I served apple pie to the remaining guests and listened to my friend Miriam tell stories about our teenage years when we thought shoplifting lipstick made us outlaws. The pie tasted like cinnamon and vindication. The next morning, Owen tried one last time to fix what couldn't be repaired. He arrived alone, unshaved and wrinkled, looking like he'd slept in his car. The boyish charm was gone, replaced by desperate vulnerability that might have worked on me once upon a time. Mom, he said, and the words sounded rusty from disuse. Can we talk? Really talk? I poured him coffee and waited. I know I've made mistakes, he began. Terrible mistakes. But you have to understand, it's been hard. The pressure, the expectations. Maribel, He stopped, perhaps realizing that blaming his wife wouldn't save him. He touched the framed photograph on the mantel, a picture of himself at 4 years old with bubble bath in his hair, grinning like he owned the world. I don't know how I became this person, he said, and for a moment I heard the little boy he'd been before life taught him that other people existed to serve his needs. You took the path of least resistance, I told him. Every time there was a choice between doing what was right and doing what was easy, you chose easy. Every time there was a choice between taking responsibility and letting someone else clean up your mess, you let someone else do the work. What can I do? Tell me how to fix this. I looked at my son, this man I'd raised and sacrificed for and enabled for 43 years, and realized that some things couldn't be fixed with apologies or promises or tears. You can tell the truth, I said. You can stop pretending you're a victim of circumstances and start admitting you created those circumstances through your own choices. He stared at the floor for a long time, and when he finally looked up, his face had gone blank again. You'll regret this, he said, just like the night before. This isn't over. But it was over. We both knew it. 2 days later, Detective Ray Morrison called to tell me that someone had attempted to access Gerald's bank accounts using forged documents. The bank had caught the attempted fraud and reported it to authorities. There would be charges filed. Owen would be arrested. I stood at my kitchen sink for a long time after that phone call, hands pressed against the cool granite countertop, feeling something I couldn't name settle in my chest. That night I dreamed of braiding Owen's hair when he was small, and every time I reached the end and tied it with a ribbon, the braid unraveled itself, and I had to start over. I woke up understanding that some things are meant to come undone. Maribel saved herself the way rats abandon sinking ships, quickly and with no regard for anyone else's survival. She went to the prosecutor's office with a prepared statement, emails she'd saved, and tears that photographed beautifully for the local newspaper. She claimed she'd been manipulated, controlled, frightened into participating in Owen's schemes. She painted herself as another victim of his charm and manipulation, a woman who'd been too scared to refuse his demands. In exchange for her cooperation, she received probation, community service, and a small fine. She also received something more valuable than legal leniency, the opportunity to stand on moral high ground while her husband sank into quicksand of his own making. She performed her victimhood with the same attention to detail she'd once brought to spending my money. Beige clothes that suggested vulnerability, carefully controlled tears, and a story that cast Owen as a man whose desperation had made him dangerous. Owen took the full weight of the consequences. There was a mugshot that appeared in the local paper alongside words like fraud, forgery, and attempted elder abuse. He didn't go to prison. His clean record and family connections provided the kind of soft landing that others wouldn't have received, but the social consequences were devastating. He was fired from his consulting job immediately. When he tried to find other work, the criminal charges followed him like a shadow. In our small town, reputation was currency, and Owen's account had been permanently closed. Former friends crossed the street to avoid him. The country club revoked his membership. Neighbors who'd once invited him to barbecues suddenly found reasons to be busy whenever they saw him coming. The bank called in their loans. The leased BMW disappeared. The house went on the market, but everyone in town knew why, and buyers stayed away from what felt like tainted property. I bought their house through a holding company with a name so boring it was invisible, Midwest Property Solutions, LLC. On closing day, I arrived with Emery, a locksmith, and Clint Alder from the ranch. The realtor looked relieved to finally close a sale that had dragged on for months. Maribel showed up to stage the house one last time, thinking she could increase the final sale price with strategically placed flowers and throw pillows. Owen arrived late, his tie loosened and his jaw tight with the kind of tension that comes from watching your life collapse in slow motion. When the notary slid the final documents across the kitchen island, I signed with my full legal name, the correct one, and handed the keys to Clint. "Make the place comfortable for the ranch hands," I told him. "Use the master bedroom. You and your crew have earned it." Maribel saw the names on the deed and made a sound I'd only heard once before, when a horse I'd known as a child had to be put down and her foal called for her all night. She turned to Owen like he could reverse the laws of physics and make this not be happening. Owen stared at the papers until his lips moved without sound, reading the same words over and over as if repetition might change their meaning. The locksmith began removing the front door hardware while we all stood there, replacing it with new locks that none of them would ever have keys to. I thanked the realtor for her patience. I thanked the notary for her time. I thanked the silence for holding steady while justice found its footing. Then I turned to Owen and placed a folded envelope in his hand. "What is it?" he asked, and the little boy's voice was back, bright with hope that maybe his mother had one more rescue left in her. "A list of shelters that accept couples," I said. "And some information about job placement services for people with criminal records." They followed us to the front door like ghosts who hadn't figured out yet that they didn't live there anymore. On the front step, Maribel grabbed my sleeve with desperate fingers. "You're a monster," she hissed. I looked at her perfectly manicured nails gripping the fabric of my jacket, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades, complete indifference to her opinion of me. "I learned from the best," I said, and stepped down into the afternoon sunshine. Some nights, my chest aches the way it did when Owen was a baby, and I'd wake up full of milk and love with nowhere to put either. I stand in my kitchen and let the ache work itself through my system like a fever that has to burn itself out. In the morning, I work. I walk the fence lines with Clint and learn the names of the horses. I take calls from Dr. Mitchell's office because she's referred other elderly clients who need legal advocacy. I send Clint's wife a catalog page with a kitchen stove she's been wanting and write "order it" across the top. I have lunch with Miriam in town, and we talk about our mothers, our mistakes, and the boys we loved who didn't deserve it. We talk about the difference between forgiveness and moving on, and why one requires the other person's participation while the other can be done alone. One evening, weeks after the house changed hands, I sat on the porch with Emery and watched the sky go purple at the edges. "Do you have any regrets?" he asked. I thought about all the small mercies I could have offered and didn't. I thought about Owen's baby hair under my fingers and the sound a door makes when it locks from the inside. I regret that I raised a man who mistook kindness for stupidity, I said. And I regret how long it took me to stop proving him right. Before Emery left that night, he told me I was the most thoroughly prepared client he'd ever worked with. That's what women become, I told him, when they realize nobody else is coming to save them. I still write in my notebook every day, but I upgraded from the cheap spiral version to a leather journal because good paper deserves good thoughts. I write what I ate, something I remember, and something true about the present moment. Tonight I wrote, "The gate is locked and I hold the only key." Then, because it pleased me, I drew a small star next to the sentence and colored it in until it was dark as midnight. A week after Owen and Maribel lost the house, I drove past to see how Clint and his crew were settling in. The windows were open to air out fresh paint. The old maple tree was dropping seed helicopters onto the lawn like confetti celebrating a victory nobody else had noticed. Owen and Maribel were on the sidewalk with 3 suitcases and 2 garbage bags containing what was left of their old life. They stood close together but didn't touch, like magnets with the same polarity forced into proximity. A neighbor across the street lifted his hand in what might have been a wave, then lowered it when he remembered he had no idea what the appropriate gesture was for this situation. I slowed the truck and rolled down the window. For a moment, I considered offering something soft for them to land on. Some small mercy that would ease their transition from comfort to consequence. But softness was what had gotten me abandoned in a nursing home. Mercy was what had taught them that my needs didn't matter as much as their wants. I nodded once, the way you acknowledge someone you recognize but don't particularly want to talk to, and drove on. In the rearview mirror, I watched them get smaller and smaller until the road curved and they disappeared entirely. I sleep now with the windows open, listening to horses move through the pastures and owls calling to each other across the dark fields. The morning air smells like hay and coffee and possibilities that stretch as far as the horizon. The porch still sighs when I step onto it, but now it sounds like a house grateful to have someone in it who understands what homes are for. Some nights, storms walk across the grassland, and the big sky shows off by holding all that lightning without breaking. I go to bed with hair that smells like rain and wind, and I dream of doors that open when I turn the handle because the house belongs to me and I belong to it. I begin most days with tea in Gerald's kitchen, watching sunrise paint the hills gold. I end most days on the porch, watching shadows stretch long across the pastures while horses move like prayers through the gathering dark. I have no interest in forgiveness, but I've made friends with peace. If you think those are the same thing, you've never been betrayed by someone you raised from birth to believe your love was unconditional. Revenge didn't make me young again, and it didn't erase the years I spent being taken for granted. But it made me free. It gave me back the right to say no without guilt, to set boundaries without apology, to live for myself without permission from people who never deserved that power over me. And freedom, I've learned, is the only inheritance worth fighting for. Sometimes people ask me if I miss them, if I miss Owen and Maribel, if I feel guilty about how completely I destroyed their comfortable life. The answer is complicated. I miss the little boy Owen was before the world taught him that charm could substitute for character. I miss the relationship we might have had if I'd been brave enough to set boundaries when he was young enough to learn respect instead of entitlement. But I don't miss being used. I don't miss being taken for granted. I don't miss the woman I was when I believed that love meant accepting whatever treatment people decided I deserved. That woman died in a nursing home chair that smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. The woman who replaced her knows her worth and refuses to negotiate it. 6 months after the house sold, I got a letter forwarded from my old address. Owen's handwriting, careful and small like he was rationing ink.
Mom, it began.
I know you probably won't read this, but I needed to try. I've had time to think about what happened, about the choices I made, and the person I became. You were right about everything. I did take the easy path. I did use your love against you. I did treat you like a resource instead of a person. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I understand now what I threw away. Not the money, though losing that hurt, but the relationship with the one person who loved me enough to sacrifice everything for my happiness. I'm working construction now. Clint Alder got me the job, which is more kindness than I earned. The work is hard and the pay is small, but it's honest. Maybe that's something. Maribel left. She said she couldn't build a life with someone who had nothing to offer but apologies and minimum wage. I think she's probably right. I think I spent so many years being the person she wanted me to be that I forgot how to be the person you raised me to be. I know it's too late for us. I know I burned that bridge so completely there's nothing left but ashes. But I wanted you to know that your son, the real one, not the man who pretended to be him, is still in here somewhere. And he's finally learning the lessons you tried to teach him 40 years ago. I hope the ranch makes you happy. I hope you're surrounded by people who see your worth instead of just your usefulness. You deserved better than what I gave you, and I'm sorry it took losing everything to figure that out. I read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and put it in the drawer with Gerald's final message to me. Some doors, once closed, shouldn't be reopened. Some relationships, once broken, can't be mended with words and good intentions. But some apologies, even when they come too late, still matter. I wrote back just once. Owen, I received your letter. I'm glad you're working and learning what honest labor feels like. I'm sorry it took consequences this severe to teach you lessons that should have been learned decades ago. I can't give you absolution. I can't pretend the last 40 years didn't happen the way they happened. But I can tell you this. The son I raised is still worth saving, even if the relationship between us isn't. Build a life you can be proud of. Treat people with kindness and respect. Learn the difference between wanting something and deserving it. Do better than the man you were when you walked away from me in that nursing home. That's not for me. That's for you. I signed it Dahlia instead of Mom, because some titles have to be earned back rather than assumed. I never heard from him again, and that's probably for the best. Some stories end with reconciliation and renewed relationships. Others end with understanding and separate paths. This one ends with a woman who finally learned that she was worth more than other people's convenience. A woman who discovered that setting boundaries isn't cruelty, it's self-respect. A woman who found peace not in forgiveness, but in refusing to accept less than she deserved. I'm 68 years old, and I've learned that love without respect is just a leash. The day I cut that leash was the day I started living for myself instead of for the approval of people who never appreciated the gift they were given. The ranch is quiet tonight. The horses are settled in their stalls, and the night crew is making their final rounds. Tomorrow will bring new challenges and new possibilities, and I'll meet them both as a woman who knows her own worth. The gate is locked, and I hold the only key. And that, finally, is exactly how it should be. Sometimes the people who hurt you the most are the ones who think you'll never fight back. They see your love and mistake it for weakness. They see your sacrifice and assume it means you have no choice. But what happens when the woman they discarded finally stops accepting whatever treatment they decide she deserves? What happens when she discovers she has more power than they ever imagined? You get justice. You get peace. You get a life that belongs entirely to you. And sometimes, that's the only happy ending that matters. If you've ever been told you're too old to start over, let me tell you, that's a lie. Your story isn't over, and you still have chapters left to write. Our best-selling book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, is filled with simple, powerful steps to help you heal, rebuild, and fall in love with life again. Click the link in the description box and start your new beginning today. Don't forget to like this video if Dahlia's story touched your heart. Subscribe for more real stories about real strength, and share this with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to reclaim your power. Hit that bell icon so you never miss a story, and comment below about a time when someone underestimated you. I read every comment, and your stories inspire me every day. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in our next video.